It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Our 20th wedding anniversary. 20 years of laughter, tears, struggles, triumphs. 20 years of memories built together. And to celebrate this milestone, we'd planned an intimate dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant downtown. Soft candlelight flickered gently, and the room was filled with the murmurs of couples lost in their own worlds, the subtle clinking of glasses providing a warm backdrop. I had arrived first, dressed carefully in the deep emerald gown he once told me was his favorite color on me. I wanted everything to be perfect. Tonight was about us, our love, and the lifetime we'd shared. I checked my phone, noticing the time tick slowly forward. 15 minutes late, then 25. A sinking feeling began to twist in my stomach, subtle at first, but becoming sharper by the minute. "Everything okay, miss?" The waiter approached gently, probably sensing my anxiety. I forced a smile, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Yes, he's just running late," I replied, more to reassure myself than him. But when 35 minutes had passed, anxiety tightened into dread. I picked up my phone again, fingers trembling slightly as I typed a quick text. "Hey, honey, everything all right? You're running late." I watched the screen, desperate for the comforting 3 dots that indicated a reply was on its way. But there was nothing, just silence. 45 minutes turned to an hour. Now, even the waitstaff avoided my eyes, probably pitying the woman sitting alone at a table clearly set for 2. I took a shaky breath, embarrassed but determined to stay composed, and tapped out another message. "I'm getting worried. Please call me." Moments later, my phone buzzed, startling me enough to nearly spill my wine. Relief flooded through me, thinking he'd finally responded. But as I glanced down, relief turned instantly into disbelief. The words on the screen blurred as shock overwhelmed me. "I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer from now on." My heart lurched violently in my chest, a painful jolt so fierce it stole the breath from my lungs. I blinked rapidly, desperately hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less devastating, but they remained stark, cold, and brutally clear. I couldn't stop a sharp gasp escaping my lips. Heads turned subtly around me, the whispers grew louder, and I felt the hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck, burning my cheeks. I was frozen, trapped in that awful moment, exposed and raw in front of strangers. My fingers hovered over the screen, tears blurring my vision as they threatened to fall. How could 20 years of devotion, trust, and sacrifice, end like this? With a cold text, devoid of explanation or comfort, cruel in its simplicity. Around me, the soft music now felt mocking, the candles suddenly cruel, highlighting my shame instead of illuminating romance. I felt the weight of every curious glance, every quiet whisper, and every unspoken judgment as though they were physical blows. Mustering every ounce of dignity left in me, I typed a single word in reply. Understood. Then I stood slowly, feeling dizzy, nauseous, and utterly hollow. As I walked out, leaving behind the untouched dinner and my shattered dreams, I held on to a quiet strength rising somewhere deep inside, whispering that my story wouldn't end here. But still, I wondered, how could he do this to me? How could he humiliate me so publicly, so callously? And as I stepped into the cool night air, the painful question echoed again and again in my mind, refusing to be silenced. Why would he throw away everything we built together in front of the entire world? Looking back, I still vividly remember the way he smiled at me the day we met. It was gentle, disarming, one of those smiles that seemed to promise a lifetime of happiness. We were young, hopeful, and completely enamored with each other. I still recall our first date at that little diner by the beach, where the air smelled of salt and sunshine, and how he'd nervously reached across the table to hold my hand. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing at all. By the end of that night, I felt certain he was the one. We were married a year later in a small, sweet ceremony by the sea, surrounded by family, friends, and countless whispered promises of forever. In those early days, every moment was magical. We built dreams together, dreams of a big house filled with laughter, children's footsteps echoing down the hallways, and long evenings on the porch watching the sunset fade into stars. We promised each other we'd always be honest, faithful, supportive, no matter how hard life became. Back then, I never imagined those promises would someday feel so hollow. I gave up my career shortly after our first child was born. I willingly traded professional ambition for motherhood, believing deeply that family was my truest calling. I cooked, cleaned, helped with homework, attended every soccer game, every dance recital. I supported his career, listened to his stresses, celebrated his promotions, soothed his frustrations. And I did it all without hesitation, without complaint, because love, real love, meant sacrifice, didn't it? As the years passed, though, subtle changes began creeping into our relationship. At first, they were tiny things, small gestures or missing words. He stopped complimenting me when I dressed up, stopped noticing my efforts around the house. When he did talk, the warmth was fading, replaced by short answers and dismissive sighs. Still, I made excuses. He was stressed from work, tired from responsibilities. I convinced myself it wasn't about me. Yet, even then, something felt quietly off. Soon, he began comparing me subtly to other women we knew, casually remarking on how successful someone else's wife had become, or how attractive a colleague was at a company event. His comments, masked as harmless observations, burrowed beneath my skin and lingered there, quietly undermining my confidence day by day. I never spoke up. Instead, I doubled down, pushed myself harder to meet his silent expectations. I kept the house spotless, always had dinner ready, always wore a smile, even as exhaustion tugged at every nerve. Yet, despite every effort, I felt his approval slipping further away. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Late-night texts he'd quickly hide if I walked into the room, the calls taken hurriedly in the garage, the lingering scent of perfume I didn't recognize. My heart knew, long before my mind would admit it, that something was horribly wrong. I tried confronting him once, gently, carefully. He dismissed me with irritation, telling me I was paranoid, imagining things. The look of impatience in his eyes pierced deep, leaving me ashamed and confused. I didn't dare bring it up again. Instead, I buried my suspicions deep inside, desperate to protect the illusion of the life we'd built. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had somehow become a carefully constructed facade. But I ignored the signs, convinced myself to stay quiet, patient, hopeful. I believed if I loved harder, worked harder, sacrificed more, he'd eventually remember who I was, how much we had together. But that night, the night of our 20th anniversary, finally shattered every fragile excuse I'd clung to. The brutal reality of his text stripped away every comforting lie I had carefully nurtured. Yet, even as I sat there, stunned by his cruelty, part of me wasn't completely surprised. Deep down, I'd sensed it coming, had felt betrayal silently approaching, like a dark storm inching closer across the horizon. Still, knowing doesn't soften the blow. Knowing doesn't erase the humiliation, the betrayal. Knowing didn't prepare me for how sharply his rejection would slice through everything I thought was true. Yet somehow, despite the pain, something deep within me whispered, this was the beginning, not the end. In that moment, sitting alone in that restaurant, I realized I had reached the limit of my silence. My love, my sacrifice, my devotion, none of it had been enough. But maybe, just maybe, my strength would be. Only later would I realize how clearly that quiet strength had always been there, hidden beneath years of compromise and silence. It was waiting patiently, ready to rise when everything else had fallen apart. That night, as tears fell silently onto my untouched plate, I didn't just mourn the loss of a marriage. I quietly accepted that my life was about to change dramatically. And despite the ache, despite the heartbreak, something stronger had started growing inside me. But first, there were truths I needed to uncover. Secrets that had lurked just beyond my reach. The questions I'd ignored, the doubts I'd silenced, they had now become impossible to dismiss. I was done hiding from reality, done being afraid of what I might discover. It was time to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful. Because deep down, I knew the truth was the only thing powerful enough to set me free. The silence in the house was a different kind of loud now. It no longer hummed with routine or comfort. It pressed against my skin, sharp and sterile. A week had passed since the anniversary dinner that never was, since the text, since understood. I had barely slept, but not from grief alone. My mind was working in overdrive, rewinding every conversation, every odd glance, every missing receipt. And still, something wasn't adding up. One night, around 2 a.m., I found myself sitting in the home office, his office. The room smelled like his cologne and printer ink, and it made my skin crawl. I didn't plan to snoop. I only meant to sit, breathe, maybe gather myself. But then I saw it, a manila envelope, carelessly tucked beneath a stack of tax papers. My name was scribbled on it in his handwriting, and the moment I touched it, I knew. I wasn't supposed to find this yet. Inside were printouts, property titles, joint account statements with recent withdrawals, except they weren't joint anymore. My name had been removed from several, quietly, strategically, and then came the spreadsheet. It was a detailed list of our assets, real estate, stocks, even personal belongings like jewelry and heirlooms, all categorized under 2 columns, his and hers. Except the hers column was laughably short, almost insulting. It hit me then. This wasn't a man acting out of emotion or heartbreak. This had been calculated, planned. That spreadsheet wasn't created overnight. That required weeks, if not months, of preparation. All while I was still packing his lunches, still reminding him to take his vitamins, still kissing his cheek as he left the house. I felt something crack open inside me. Not rage, not yet. Just a cold, steady clarity. I spent the next morning digging deeper. I opened an old laptop he'd discarded 2 years ago, claiming it was too slow. It still booted up. And what I found made my hands go numb. There were folders labeled consulting projects. But they were just cover names. Inside were dozens of PDFs, scanned hotel receipts, flights, spa bills. At first I thought they were forged, but no. His name was on the check-ins, and another name too. I clicked one image by accident and nearly dropped the laptop. It was a selfie, him and Lisa, my best friend, my shoulder to cry on, the woman who helped me decorate our bedroom, who stood beside me at our vow renewal. Her smile in the photo was so smug, so intimate, so entitled, as if she believed she had earned him. I covered my mouth. I couldn't even cry. Just silence. An awful, bottomless silence. Then came the emails, hundreds of them. They talked about the plan, about freeing him from that house, and about my health, as if my therapy sessions were ammunition in their campaign to paint me unstable. They joked about how predictable I was, how I would take it silently, as always. And for a moment, they were right. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't call anyone. I just began to catalog. Every message, every receipt, every conversation between them. I took screenshots. I emailed them to a private cloud. I even recorded the timestamps and organized them into folders by topic: financial deceit, infidelity, gaslighting. When my hands started to shake, I paused, but I didn't stop. There was one folder I hadn't opened yet, labeled simply Final Steps. Inside were drafted divorce documents, pre-signed, outlining that I would agree to part with minimal claim due to my emotional instability. They even included suggested talking points for his lawyer. He had planned not just my removal, but my humiliation. That night, I sat in our garden, the same garden where we once planted rose bushes for our anniversary. I watched the wind bend the petals, watched the night breathe quietly, and I made a promise, not to destroy him. No, to dismantle the illusion he had so carefully built. I whispered to the wind, "You think I've said nothing because I'm weak, but I'm only quiet because I'm watching." And I meant it. From that moment forward, I began preparing, not to beg, not to explain, but to reclaim. Because if they thought I would walk away ashamed, they'd misunderstood who I really was. I had been silent for long enough, I don't remember sleeping the night after he sent that text. The words kept flashing behind my eyelids like neon lights in a dark alley. I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. It was cold, calculated, almost rehearsed. But what he didn't know was that while he had spent the last year preparing to discard me like an old photograph, I had spent the last 3 months gathering truth like kindling. And tonight? Tonight, I was going to light the match. It was his birthday. I insisted on throwing a dinner, something he assumed was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt to win him back. He smirked through the invitations I sent out, smug as ever. Family, friends, business partners, his favorite people, everyone was invited. He didn't know that I had planned the guest list meticulously, or that I'd worked with a friend to rent a private hall styled like his favorite cigar lounge. Warm wood panels, soft jazz, brandy in cut crystal glasses. I knew how to keep his ego comfortable. That was always my job. And he had no idea it was the last time he'd ever feel in control. The room filled slowly with laughter, clinks of cutlery, and familiar voices. My mother-in-law, seated near the front, beamed at him. His business partner, Dennis, raised a toast. And then he looked at me, half drunk already, half disinterested, and whispered, "At least you're good at this." I smiled. That would be the last condescending compliment he'd ever give me. I waited until dessert was served, until the wine had softened everyone's edges. Then I stood. "Before we wrap up the night," I began, voice just above the gentle hum of music, "I have a little surprise for my husband." He looked amused, arrogant. He probably thought I had arranged some slideshow of our memories, some weepy dedication to a man who had long since stopped being mine. The projector came on, but it wasn't a slideshow of love. It was surveillance footage. The first clip showed him at a hotel lobby, hands on a woman's waist, too intimate to be mistaken. The second clip, them entering a room together, time-stamped just days before our anniversary. The room fell silent. Some gasped. Some looked away. One of his cousins whispered, "Jesus Christ." He turned, red creeping up his neck. "What is this? What the hell are you doing?" I didn't flinch. Just getting started. The next slide was a scanned document, a financial audit. I had quietly hired a forensic accountant, someone I trusted, and what we found? Shocking. Bank accounts opened under shell corporations, real estate purchases in another woman's name, a flow of money redirected from our joint account to offshore holdings. He had been funneling money out of our life for months, maybe years, and still, I wasn't finished. A third clip began playing. It was a voice recording. My husband, on the phone, with his lawyer. "Yeah, she's not going to fight. She's too weak for that. Once I get her to sign the papers, I'll sell the house. She'll walk away with scraps. Maybe she'll finally get a job." The room erupted. His mother stood up. "Did you say that? Tell me you didn't say that." My husband's face contorted, shock turning to rage. "You set me up?" "No," I said quietly. "You set yourself up. I just pressed play." He lunged toward me, but Dennis blocked his path. "I'd sit down if I were you." The silence that followed was deafening. I took a breath and looked around. I was going to leave quietly. I had no intention of dragging this through the mud. But then he chose humiliation. A cold text during our anniversary dinner, surrounded by strangers. "So tonight I chose truth," he scoffed. "You think this little show will change anything?" I nodded. "I do." And with that, I turned to our attorney. Yes, our attorney. I had fired the one he tried to assign me weeks ago and hired someone smarter, someone sharper. "We've filed for divorce, contested, adultery, financial fraud, emotional abandonment, and since most of our assets were still technically in my name, at his request, of course, for tax purposes, I've frozen the accounts." He went pale. "You'll be staying in a hotel tonight," I added calmly. "The house is no longer yours." My voice didn't rise. I didn't scream. I didn't throw wine in his face. But the way he staggered back, like he'd just been hit by a truck, told me that dignity, when wielded with precision, can be the deadliest weapon. Outside, the night was cool. I stood near the entrance, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of finally not being afraid anymore. A woman from the crowd, his aunt, approached me. "I always thought you were too quiet," she said. "But tonight, you were thunder." I smiled faintly. Took me long enough. And then I walked away, not triumphant, not angry, just lighter. Because the twist wasn't just what I revealed. It was who I had become in the process. And he wasn't just exposed. He was irrelevant. The night didn't end with applause. That's not how truth works. It ended in stunned silence, followed by murmurs. A few of his friends left early, embarrassed. Some stayed just long enough to avoid seeming complicit. His cousin, one who used to tease me at every family barbecue, couldn't even meet my eyes as he slipped out the side door. But I didn't stay to watch it all unravel. I stepped into the hallway with my attorney trailing behind, her folder thick with signed declarations and time-stamped proofs. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence alone said it all. I had planned this with care, not chaos. From the corner of my eye, I saw her, the woman in the hotel video. She had come. Of course she had. She thought this was his birthday. She thought she was showing up to toast the man who had promised her a new life. She never made it inside the main room. Her heels stopped clicking the moment she heard the audio from outside the door. Her face twisted as she pressed her hand against the glass, just as his voice played loud and clear. "She's too weak for that." And then she turned and left. I didn't chase. I didn't smirk. I let her go. Maybe she was just another pawn. Maybe not. But I wasn't in the business of saving anyone but myself now. Downstairs, the valet handed me my keys and paused. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "just wanted to say..." That was the coldest walkout I've ever seen. I gave him a small nod and slid into my car, the engine humming steady beneath me. As I drove home, my home, the one now legally protected by an emergency court order, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel vindicated. What I felt was something quieter, surer. Like the earth beneath me had finally stopped shifting. He had once been my axis, the center I revolved around, shrinking myself to fit the orbit. But tonight, I was the gravity. And when I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back, not at the building, not at the people, not even at the chapter that had just slammed shut, because I wasn't leaving the party. I was walking toward the rest of my life. I wish I could tell you he fell apart overnight, that the moment I walked out of that birthday dinner, the universe spun on its heel and punished him immediately. But life doesn't always move that fast, not even when it should. What happened instead was slower, and in many ways it was far more devastating. He tried to act like nothing had changed. The very next day, he showed up at the house, his house, as he'd always called it, only to be denied entry by security. I watched from the upstairs window as he argued with the guards I had hired, his face reddening with every passing second. He yelled, barked orders, even called the police. But the house, it was mine, legally. You see, years ago when he opened that business, he put the mortgage under my name to protect his assets from liability. He never thought I'd do anything with it because in his mind I was just a placeholder. But placeholders don't stay still forever. He had nowhere to go that night. The condo he used for his affairs? Turns out it wasn't in his name either. It was under one of those dummy corporations, and once my attorney submitted the fraud claims, the account funding it got frozen. So he checked into a mid-range hotel using a friend's card. From 5-star dinners to rubbery scrambled eggs in a lukewarm buffet line. That was the beginning of his descent. Social fallout came next. A week after the party, Dennis, the business partner who once toasted him, called me. "I've known him for years," he said, voice low. "But that recording? That man wasn't just cheating. He was planning to gut you. That's not a partner. That's a snake." Dennis publicly announced a restructuring of the firm. My husband was quietly removed from operations. And the whispers? They grew loud fast. Investors backed away. Clients asked questions. One woman at their holiday fundraiser even approached me, clutching her wine glass tightly. "I always thought he was a little too smooth," she said, "but I never imagined." Neither did I. But once people saw the footage, heard the recording, I didn't have to convince anyone. His own words had done the work for me. His reputation started crumbling, brick by brick, and then came the legal reckoning. The divorce hearings didn't go as he expected. He showed up to court wearing his best suit, jaw clenched, still thinking he could out-talk everyone. But the judge had reviewed our evidence, the financial documents, the recordings, the timeline. He granted me sole ownership of the house, half the value of the business, and spousal support for 5 years, based on the lifestyle I had sustained him through. He argued, he slammed papers. At one point he even muttered, "She's ruining me." The judge looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, sir, you did that yourself." The final blow wasn't legal, though. It was personal. 2 weeks later, his girlfriend, the woman he thought he'd trade me in for, walked out on him. She left a note. No confrontation, no tears. Just this: I didn't sign up for a scandal. I wanted a man who was in control, not one who got publicly outplayed by his wife. I almost laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, but because poetic justice doesn't always rhyme. Sometimes it bites. One afternoon, I saw him at the grocery store. He didn't notice me at first. He was standing in the frozen aisle, staring blankly at a shelf of microwavable dinners. Same man who once lectured me on plating a steak just right, now debating between lasagna and mystery meat. When he finally saw me, his face froze. And I just smiled. Not cruelly, not smug, just calmly. He opened his mouth like he might say something, but I turned my cart and walked away before he could. That was the real justice. Not the money, not the property. It was the silence, the peace, the power of no longer needing to be angry. He lost the house, the firm, the mistress, the image, the control. And me? I didn't lose anything. Because everything he tried to steal from me, my voice, my value, my dignity, I took it back. And this time, I kept the receipt. These days, my mornings start slow. Not because I'm tired or overwhelmed or picking up broken pieces, but because I finally can. I sit by the window with my coffee, black, a splash of cream, no sugar, and I listen. Birds, wind in the trees, the neighbor's dog chasing nothing. For years, my life was noise, questions I couldn't ask, answers I didn't want, and the kind of silence that hurt more than shouting ever could. But now the silence is mine. There's no dramatic finale, no fairy tale redo, no second husband waiting with open arms. Just me. And strangely, that feels like enough. I painted the guest room yellow. That was the first real change. A soft, buttery yellow that catches the afternoon light just right. I keep fresh flowers in there. Sunflowers if I can find them, daffodils if I can't. No one sleeps there yet. But it reminds me that this home belongs to me now, fully, quietly, without apology. People ask me if I ever regret it. The marriage, the years, the way I stayed even after the cracks turned into chasms. And the truth is, no. I don't regret loving someone. I regret forgetting myself. But I found her again. In little things. I found her in the way I now walk into rooms without shrinking. In how I say no without explaining myself. In how I laugh, really laugh, when something's funny, without wondering who's watching. There's a certain freedom in no longer asking for permission to exist. My sister visited last month. We hadn't been close in years. She brought her daughter with her, 7 years old, freckles across her cheeks, and a voice that could crack stone when she giggled. We were baking together, and at one point her daughter looked up at me and said, "You're happy. I can tell." I asked her how she knew. She shrugged and said, "Your house smells like warm things, and you smile with your eyes." It stopped me cold. Because when was the last time someone saw me like that? Not as the woman who held it together. Not as the wife who got left. Not as the one who fought back. But just happy. It reminded me that healing doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it tiptoes in while you're folding laundry or kneading dough. It takes root when you least expect it. Quiet, steady, real. To anyone watching this, especially those who've ever sat at a table where their worth was questioned, where their love was mishandled, where their voice was dismissed, you are not what they said about you. You are not the way they left. You are not the silence they forced, and you are certainly not the version of you they chose to forget. Your story doesn't end at the betrayal. It begins the moment you choose yourself again, and it doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need to come with declarations or revenge. Sometimes justice is simply a door that closes behind you and never opens again. You might not feel strong yet. That's okay. Some days you'll still ache. Some days you'll question everything. And some days you'll surprise yourself with how deeply you can breathe, how boldly you can stand, how easily you can smile. It's coming, I promise. I don't know your name, but if this story reached you, if it made you nod, tear up, clench your fists, or breathe easier, then I hope you remember this. You didn't just survive. You endured, you learned, and in time, you bloomed. Have you ever lived through something like this? If you have, I'd be honored to hear your story below. You never know who needs to read your words tonight, and if someone in your life is still waiting to remember their worth, send this to them. Let them know they're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, quiet stories of strength, truth, and healing, feel free to subscribe. We're building something honest here. Something warm, something real. You deserve that. You always did.